Traore has done the unthinkable. On the morning of August 18th, 2025, he ordered the entire United States Embassy to leave Burkina Faso. Who else would dare to tell the most powerful nation on earth to pack its bags? Who else would lower the stars and stripes and raise instead the banner of Africa's sovereignty? This was not a quarrel over words. It was a thunderclap that shook Washington, Paris, Brussels, Moscow, and Beijing all at once. Was it madness or was it courage? Was it a reckless gamble or the first spark of true independence? And here is the question echoing tonight through the streets of Ouagadougou. Can a poor nation truly choose dignity over aid and still survive? Or is it destined to perpetually submit to those who control Africa's narrative? Addressing his people, Traore announced that their action was not about removing an embassy, but about casting off the long-standing arrogance that had shackled the continent. His message spread with fiery intensity throughout the Sahel region. Can the world ignore him now? Stay with us. This story asks what freedom truly costs. Comment where you're watching from. And if you believe Africa's voice must rise, like, share, and subscribe. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood by the long oak table in Ouagadougou. The fresh American report spread before him. His aides watched as he flipped the pages, every paragraph marked with red strokes of his pen. "Listen to this," he said, his voice low but cutting. Burkinabe armed forces listed alongside extremist groups. He found their audacity to write such a thing unbelievable. It was shocking that they would equate their soldiers, who served as a protective barrier for villages, with the killers responsible for the Arbinda massacre. The Minister of Defense moved uncomfortably in his position. True, perhaps they do not understand our reality. Traoré's hand slammed down. Not understand? 2 million of our people have been driven from their homes since 2016. Did they not read the figures from the UN itself? 2,000 civilians dead last year on our soil. And yet Washington from its safe halls declares that our defenders are no different from those who slaughter children. He paused, eyes burning. What arrogance writes such words? Far away in Washington, officials presented the report in a detached, unemotional manner. To them, it was merely a bureaucratic task. However, for Traore, the report felt like a personal attack. He called a spokesman into the chamber. "Read it to the people," Traore ordered. "Let every mother who has buried a son hear how America names him." That evening, state television echoed his fury. "The United States claims our army violates human rights. Who gives America the authority to define our dignity?" The broadcaster continued. And in the barracks of Kaya, young soldiers listened in silence, fists clenched. One soldier muttered, "So our captain's words are true. They call us criminals." Another soldier responded with bitterness, pointing out their sacrifices in Jibo and Yaga, only to be compared with Al-Qaeda. Upon receiving further reports, Traore convened a meeting with his ministers. He spoke with a commanding voice that resonated throughout the room. "Every day our fighters hold the line in Sam and Udalan. They keep jihadists from tearing apart the last of our schools. And what does America see? Numbers on paper. They count children, but do they count the widows we leave behind? They speak of violations, but do they speak of martyrdom? Tell me, do they?" The ministers were silent. Only the hum of the ceiling fan marked the seconds. He pressed on, walking slowly, his boots echoing on the tiles. "This issue goes beyond legality, my comrades. The central issue here concerns who has the power to shape the narrative. If we are categorized as terrorists, what will become of Burkina Faso's legacy? What kind of history will our children be left with? Do we allow others to dictate our place, or do we claim it ourselves?" In the streets, protests swelled. Placards rose with the words, "Sovereignty is not for sale." Yet it was Traore's voice that carried above all. On the balcony of the presidential palace, he addressed the crowd directly. "They tell you your soldiers are criminals," he cried. "But I tell you they are guardians. They fall so that you may rise. Shall we bow before distant capitals that know nothing of our wounds?" The crowd responded with a resounding no. Within the palace, an aide expressed concern, reminding the captain that America provides crucial funding for food, medicine, and schools. Traore interrupted him, asserting that receiving aid at the cost of one's dignity is a form of enslavement. Better hunger and freedom than bread and humiliation. Do you not see? They wish us to kneel so that help feels like grace. But we are not beggars. We are a nation. Again, silence spread in the room. His ministers exchanged glances. His words were bold, perhaps reckless. Yet who could deny their power? That night, alone in his study, Traore stared at the fading light. As if speaking directly to his country, he murmured that while they might be labeled poor, they certainly were not without a voice. They may describe us as fragile, but we remain whole. To let this affront go unchallenged would be a betrayal of every soldier who has fallen in the Sahel. He closed the report, pressing it flat against the table. The seed had been planted not in Washington, but here in Ouagadougou, and who could say what storm it would grow into? On the 18th of August 2025, the streets of Ouagadougou fell into a tense silence. Soldiers had cordoned off the boulevard leading to the American embassy. Their boots pressed into the dust, rifles slung across their shoulders. Behind the gates, staff hurriedly packed boxes, their faces pale under the heavy Sahel sun. The blue, red, and white flag of the United States hung limply, waiting to be lowered. Inside the presidential compound, Captain Ibrahim Traoré spoke with a voice sharpened by conviction. "Write it clearly," he commanded. "The entire embassy, not only its ambassador, the United States has crossed a line. This was not an offense against an individual, but against the entire country." Burkina Faso would not tolerate such disrespect. The foreign minister paused, noting, "Traore, an action like this has never been taken before. We have never expelled an entire embassy. The Americans will retaliate. Are we prepared for the consequences?" Traore leaned forward, his palm striking the table with a resonant thud. "Prepared? We are already bleeding. 2,000 of our citizens were killed last year by terrorists. More than 2 million are displaced living in camps. And yet Washington writes reports equating our soldiers with the murderers of our Binda. Tell me what consequence is greater than dishonor? What cost is higher than silence?" The official order was authorized by midday. It was announced across the country that evening. The government of Burkina Faso officially declared the entire United States Embassy unwelcome. Its staff are ordered to depart within 72 hours. The American flag shall no longer fly in Ouagadougou. Crowds surged toward the embassy gates as the announcement echoed across radios. When the Marines stepped forward to lower the stars and stripes, the air filled with chants. "Sovereignty is not for sale. Sovereignty is not for sale." Women ululated, youth waved Burkinab flags, and elders lifted their hands in prayer. The moment felt less like a diplomatic act than a funeral procession for an era of foreign dominance. In the square, a veteran with a crutch raised his voice. "For many years, we were led to believe we lacked the strength to be independent. Now our leader has demonstrated that they were mistaken. We are putting an end not to America, but to the very concept of arrogance." Later that night, Captain Traoré addressed the nation from the presidential palace. His words struck with deliberate force. "We are not expelling a building. We are expelling an attitude, the arrogance that has shackled Africa too long. Aid without respect is bondage. Partnership without dignity is fraud. We choose dignity. Even if we stand alone, we will stand as a nation, not as a colony." He paused, scanning the cameras, letting the silence sharpen the weight of his declaration. "Some will call us reckless, but I ask you, is it recklessness to defend the honor of those who fall daily on the Sahel front lines? Is it irresponsible to assure our children that their inheritance is a land of pride, not a beggar's bowl?" As the sun rose on August 19th, a line of black SUVs left the compound under the watch of security forces. Through the tinted glass, embassy personnel observed the crowds chanting defiantly along the road. The heavy steel gates clanged shut for the final time. For the first time in decades, the most powerful nation in the world no longer had a diplomatic foothold in Burkina Faso. Within cabinet chambers, the debate turned practical. One minister warned, Traore, we risk losing 100 million in annual American assistance, our clinics, our schools. Traore raised his hand. Let them close their checkbooks. A school built on humiliation teaches slavery. A clinic funded with contempt heals nothing. What lessons shall we leave our children? That their lives are worth aid but not dignity. The room fell into silence. Outside, the final sound of the departing motorcade faded into the night, and from the rooftops, voices still carried the chant, "Sovereignty is not for sale." The news traveled faster than the convoys leaving Ouagadougou. By dawn in Washington, the State Department was ablaze with urgency. Screens lit up with images of the stars and stripes being lowered in Burkina Faso. An aide rushed into the Situation Room. Mr. Secretary, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has expelled the entire embassy. This is not just a dispute, it is a rupture. The secretary's voice was sharp. Draft a statement immediately. This is diplomatic suicide for Ouagadougou. He threatens suspension of all assistance. If they want to isolate themselves, let them understand the cost. Within hours, American news networks carried headlines. Burkina Faso risks international isolation. Analysts warn that more than 100 million of annual assistance for health, food, and security could vanish overnight. But in Ouagadougou, Captain Traore was unshaken. Addressing his cabinet, he declared, "Do they think we trade dignity for dollars? Let them call it suicide. But what life is worth living without honor?" In Paris, the Qatari echoed alarm. French officials already forced to withdraw troops from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso itself by 2023 framed the move as reckless. One diplomat remarked that Traore was severing his final tie to Europe. In Brussels, carefully worded statements were issued, cautioning against increased isolation and jeopardized cooperation. In response, ministers in Ouagadougou defiantly questioned, "Isolation from what? From chains we never asked for." Moscow, by contrast, seized the moment. On Russian state television, commentators hailed Traore as a symbol of courage. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, standing before microphones, said with deliberate weight, "This is not madness. It is emancipation. Africa is showing it will not bow to neo-sea colonial dictates. We applaud Burkina Faso." During a private meeting, an aide inquired, "Captain, given Russia's vocal praise, should we align with them?" Traore slowly shook his head, responding, "Let them speak, but always remember that our dignity is not something to be rented out. We are not exchanging one dominant power for another." Beijing, on the other hand, remained quiet. The Chinese Foreign Ministry avoided headlines, but quietly dispatched envoys to Ouagadougou, offering humanitarian shipments and technical aid. The message delivered without cameras was simple: we do not interfere, we only partner. Traore studied the offer carefully. Notice the difference where he told his ministers, "The West threatens, Russia applauds, China observes. Each plays its game, but we must hold the board." In Ankara, the response was immediate. Turkey announced it was prepared to expand its hospitals, schools, and relief missions across the Sahel. At a media briefing, a Turkish representative stated that Burkina Faso is not isolated and that they are prepared to act as a supportive partner in both faith and progress. Inside the presidential palace, Traore considered these various reactions while tapping his fingers on the table. He quietly mused whether the world saw them as crazy or courageous. But is it madness to demand respect, or is it bravery to walk away from dependency? At that moment, the streets of Ouagadougou echoed with chants. Protesters carried signs, one reading in bold, "Our sovereignty is our survival." If you believe Captain Traoré's defiance is Africa's long-awaited turning point, a path of pride or peril, share your thoughts below and write "Amen" if you trust his courage. Back in Washington, senators grilled experts. If a small nation can dismiss us, one lawmaker asked, how many others might follow? What happens if Mali and Niger do the same? Fear rippled through corridors that once assumed obedience. In Paris, editorials painted grim futures, describing Traore as a gambler lighting a match in the Sahel's powder keg. In Moscow, newspapers called him the young lion. In Beijing, commentaries spoke of strategic patience. In Anara, he was called the new brother of the Traore, gathered his ministers once more. Listen to their word. And he said, some predict collapse, others sing our praise, others wait in silence. But none of them understand this. We are not performing for their approval. We are reclaiming our ability to breathe. Isn't it about time for Africa to have its own distinct voice, rather than just repeating the opinions of others? The room became completely still outside its confines. The consequences of August 18th had only just started to unfold. When the American flag disappeared from the skies of Ouagadougou, it was not only a piece of fabric being folded, it was a symbol of authorship of who had long held the pen that wrote Africa's story. For decades, reports drafted in Washington or Geneva carried the power to define who was victim, who was criminal, who was hero. And on the 18th of August 2025, Burkina Faso tore that script apart. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat before his council, the air heavy with the echo of global outrage. He looked at his ministers and asked, tell me, who has written our story until now? Was it us bleeding in the Sahel dust? Or was it men in suits who never walked our villages? Silence lingered until a minister finally conceded that it had always been others who portrayed them as weak, reliant, and sometimes malevolent. Traore leaned in, stating with clarity that from now on they would control their own narrative. They would no longer permit outsiders to determine whether their soldiers were heroes or villains. Outside, a new flag began to rise. Not the stars and stripes, but the banner of the AES alliance, the military pact uniting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Since 2023, youth gathered in the streets waving its green and red colors, chanting, Africa decides for Africa. The contrast was striking. The embassy gates closed. The American flag lowered in silence. The city square is alive with the AES flag lifted by voices refusing silence. An old veteran leaned on his cane, watching the crowd. He muttered, for too long they called us beggars of aid. Today we assert ourselves as the creators of our own dignity. In Washington, commentators expressed scorn, with one analyst on live TV cautioning that Traore was not only being reckless, but also attempting to seize control of the narrative. Yet in Ouagadougou, Traore confidently faced the cameras, proclaiming that this was more than just a diplomatic issue. It was a struggle for the African voice. For many years, the West has asserted its authority to label and define us. Today, we are taking back that power. He paused, his voice gaining strength as he asked, when one of our soldiers dies protecting Jibo or Ka, is he labeled a criminal? When our daughters are saved from the hands of extremists, are their rescuers called abusers? Who granted them the right to determine what our reality is? The hall burst into applause, but Traore held up his hand to quiet them. Listen to me, he said. This is a conflict fought not just with weapons, but with language, and words have the power to inflict deeper wounds than any blade. The Americans label us as violators. The Europeans warn of isolation. But who writes of our sacrifice? Who tells of our graves, dug with bare hands in villages where 2 million of our people are displaced? His words carried into the night through radios and loudspeakers in Bamako and Niamey. Echoes answered. Crowds raised the AES flag and chanted, no more borrowed voices. Later during a strategy session, an advisor quietly noted, Captain, the Western powers dominate the media and influence global opinion. Traore's reply was sharp and direct. Let them have their cameras. We will empower the voices of our own people. A child's song in Kaya holds more honesty than a multitude of headlines from Washington. The morning after the embassy gates were sealed, whispers spread across Ouagadougou. What would come next? In the markets, women worried aloud about food prices. In the clinics, doctors counted dwindling supplies of medicine. For years, the United States had channeled more than hundreds of $0 million annually into health, agriculture, and education projects. Now all of it hung by a thread. Inside the council chamber, ministers debated anxiously. One stood up and said, "Traore, without American support, our school programs could collapse. Already 6,000 classrooms have shut down due to insecurity. What will happen if aid dries up completely?" Troy's answer was firm and measured. "Then we need to consider if a classroom founded on subservience is truly a place of learning. It is preferable to have no school for a day than to raise a generation conditioned to submit." His statement carried significant weight, yet beyond the palace walls, a farmer in the Sahel, without having heard the captain's words, expressed a similar sentiment. He conveyed to a journalist with hands hardened by working the arid land that while they might face starvation, it is better to experience hunger with dignity than to be fed while in bondage. In Washington, headlines screamed warnings that Burkina Faso was engaging in diplomatic self-destruction. Officials made threats to cut off funding and cease cooperation. Analysts warned that without American grain shipments, rural provinces could face malnutrition within months. Was it not too dangerous to gamble with children's meals? But in Ouagadougou's main square, chants rose in defiance. "We are poor, but we are free," shouted a group of students. "We are small, but we decide." That same night, Traore convened his military council. Generals voiced concerns about equipment shortages if Western support ended. One asked, "Captain, how will we fight jihadists without their logistics?" TR stood before them, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you not see? They give us rifles but chain our tongues. They feed us medicine but poison our dignity. If Russia can give us tools without humiliation, if China can offer roads without lectures, why must we cling to those who despise us?" The room stirred. It was not just rhetoric. Already Moscow had sent envoys praising the decision as anti-colonial courage. Beijing had discreetly extended new trade credits. Ankara committed to increasing its humanitarian hospitals. The Sahel Alliance of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso vowed to combine their resources and enhance their military cooperation. Could hope emerge in a place where aid had been withdrawn? One evening, Traore visited a camp for displaced families, where over 2 million citizens had been scattered by the conflict. A young child took hold of his arm and asked in a low voice, "Captain, will we have enough to eat?" He knelt, looking into the child's eyes. "Maybe less food today," he said softly, "but more freedom tomorrow, and freedom will feed your soul long after bread is gone." The crowd listened in silence until one elder broke it. "We buried too many sons to kneel again. Let hunger test us. It will not break us." That night, state television broadcast the scene. Commentators called it Captain Ibrahim's latest news, framing the visit not as weakness, but as leadership that stood shoulder to shoulder with the people. Across radios, villagers repeated the child's words as though they were prophecy. Meanwhile, in Bamako, Mali's leaders declared, "This is the dawn of a Sahel that speaks for itself." In name, Niger's generals pledged joint patrols. In Moscow, state media hailed Traore as a line of sovereignty. In Beijing, officials issued no fiery statement, but tightened, quiet diplomacy, knowing silence itself could build trust. The debate stretched across continents, but in Ouagadougou, the narrative felt sharper. Was it worth risking famine for dignity? Could foreign aid ever be a true replacement for national autonomy? And when self-respect is gone, does food retain its flavor? By late August, murals began appearing on city walls. They depicted the American flag being lowered and the AES flag being raised with the painted words beneath, "We may have little, but it is ours." On the radio, a single phrase was heard over and over. "Burkina Faso, latest news, sovereignty is not for sale." And in the dusty Sahel wind, Captain Traore's voice seemed to linger. "We are not choosing hunger, we are choosing freedom." The embassy gates in Ouagadougou are now locked, the American flag lowered in silence. Yet on the very same boulevard, the AES banner rose high, carried by students who shouted until their voices cracked. Africa rise! Africa rise! Traore stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, watching the two images unfold, one fading, the other soaring. "Do you see?" he murmured to his advisors. "We are not burying ourselves. We are planting a flag that will outlive us." The symbolism was clear. One power departed, another vision was established. Yet as the sound of drums filled the square, a sharp question emerged. Was this true freedom from the long-lasting influence of Western powers? Or was it the initial move toward a perilous isolation? Could a poor nation survive with dignity intact? Or would the weight of hunger test the very soul of its people? An elder at the rally raised his hand and called out, "Traore, you gave us back our pride. Even if the road is hard, we will walk it with you." The crowd erupted, echoing his words until they became a chorus. Was this not the sound of a continent reclaiming its voice? Broadcast that night framed it as Captain Ibrahim's latest news, a story not just of one man, but of a generation demanding to be heard. Commentators reminded viewers that even the smallest state could shake the world when it chose sovereignty over submission. Hours later, another headline repeated across radios. Burkina Faso, latest news. Dignity is not for sale. In the silence after the chants, a journalist turned to Traore. "Captain, history will ask what you chose, food or freedom. How will you answer?" He looked into the camera and spoke with no hesitation. "I chose freedom because without it, food turns to ash." This was Captain Ibrahim's latest news once more, echoing far beyond the Sahel. Now the choice belongs to you watching this story. What does Africa's future mean to you? Do you see courage or do you see risk? Will you comment New Africa to ensure the message continues to spread? If this story resonated with you, do not simply move on. Like, share, speak, and subscribe, because our history has been suppressed for too long. Let us voice our future clearly. Send this to a friend on WhatsApp. Leave a single word of support in the comments and help keep the passion alive. Thank you for your